Good morning, good afternoon, perhaps even good evening, depending on where you are or if you're catching up on our recording. Thank you all very much for joining. I see people are starting to filter in. So we're due to start at 4 p.m. UK time or 10 a.m. US time. So we'll just give everyone a minute or two to filter in and then we'll get started. Okay, so as I was saying, good morning, good afternoon, perhaps even good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. So thank you very much for joining us for this month's DevTalk. So I'm going to be your host today, James Swinton Bland. So just before we start and we get into the actual content of today's presentation, I just wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping rules. So if you don't mind, Ted, just moving to the next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, just before we start, just wanted to make you all aware, make sure that you're all part of our developer community. So if you're not already signed up to our developer portal, please make sure that you do. So navigate over to developer.zebra.com. On this portal, you can keep up to date with all of our latest events, just like these. You can browse our blogs written by our internal technical colleagues and our engineers. And you can also use our forums to post any questions where an expert will come along and hopefully answer your question for you. So next slide, please, Ted. Just before we introduce our speakers for today and get into the mobile dimensioning talk, I just wanted to make you all aware of our upcoming events. So we have our team attending DroidCon London at the end of next month, the 27th and 28th of October. I'll personally be there along with some of my colleagues as well from our developer relations team. So it'd be great to see you there as well if you are local to the area or perhaps if you'll be around London at that time. So now let's get on to the actual content for today. So as you can see, today's talk is going to be around mobile parcel dimensioning. It's going to be a technical overview, and we're going to cover everything from the API. So we have two great presenters with us today. We have Raghav, who is our Senior Engineering Manager, who I believe is going to kick off the presentation. And then we have Ted Trask as well, who is our Principal Software Engineer, and he'll be taking up the presentation towards the latter half. So that's enough from me, and I will hand over to the experts now. So Raghav, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, James. Appreciate the introduction there. Thank you all, the developer community here, joining us today for this exciting talk about the mobile partial dimensioning solution that Zebra is offering. This is the first ever, certified mobile partial dimensioning solution on a mobile form factor, and we are super excited to talk about it, have this rolled into the into your workflow. Looking for more engagements as we go further. In this dev talk, we'll be covering for the agenda today, the solution overview and some of the key features of the offerings, a high-level software architecture. We'll also be talking about the software versioning scheme, which is important for the developers and the stagers. We'll also be talking about the installation procedure that covers a couple of topics on that, and then the critical part of this content is the API, which Ted would cover, and also the code walkthrough and the best practices for this API integration. Next slide, please. High-level solution overview here. Ted, go ahead and play the video.
Introducing Zebra Dimensioning Certified Mobile Parcel. Now measuring parcels is as easy as scanning a barcode. Zebra's integrated time-of-flight depth sensor allows you to capture accurate parcel dimensions, verify postage costs, and expedite parcel logistics. It's the future of mobile dimensioning from Zebra.
So as you could see in the video, it's a quick and fast dimensioning solution. It's certified. In the solution offering, we would have both a certified and a non-certified SKU. Right. The solution is going to be offered on a premium TC53 and 58 mobile computers. These premium devices has the time of flight depth camera enabled, which enables us to perform accurate dimensioning. The solution will be certified at OIML, NTAP, Measurement Canada, and then NMI regulatory agencies. Like on the bottom left, you see some of the table that we are describing. You'll have different hardware SKUs. So if you're from US region, you'll get a certified US SKU. If you're in Canada, you will get a certified Canada SKU, and the same and the same applies for the other regions too. If you're looking for a non-certified regions, we do also have an offering for that, which is a non-certified SKU, hardware SKU. So a quick overview on the dimensioning rounding rules. As you can see here, it is based on the regulatory requirements. Like if you're at US or Canada, you have different rounding rules. Like at once, like you start from 12 centimeters to 24 centimeters. So our dimensioning range for US starts from 12 centimeters to 100 centimeters. So there are different D values, or the division values, as they could say. 12 centimeters to 24 centimeters has a 1 centimeter rounding rule, and then the 2 centimeters for 24 to 60, and as it goes on. Right. All of these are we follow the guidelines from the regulatory agencies for this. For non-certified offering, we keep a single 0.1 centimeter rounding rule, which brings you up from like 10 centimeters. You can measure a box, a cuboidal box, from 10 centimeters all the way up to 120 centimeters, and at an accuracy of like at a rounding rule of 0.1 centimeter. Next slide, please. I want to highlight some key features of the solution being offered here. This the dimensioning, the partial dimensioning primarily is for cuboidal parcels, and the workflow is you would use the mobile computer pointed top down of the box and dimension it. You could also do two-sided approach, which is top and the front face of the parcel. This could ideally happen if you're measuring something like larger boxes, like let's say 60 or 80 centimeter box. You would be angling the device and trying to dimension the box. The solution, as I said earlier, would support both certified and non-certified version of the solution. The certified is a variety of SKUs, like I said earlier in the previous slide. You have US and Canada and other regions. For non-certified, you have two different SKUs, one for the North America and one for the rest of the world, TC53 and 58 offerings. The software is going to be pre-installed. The software in this particular case, both the application, the demo application, and the core framework, dimensioning framework would be pre-installed from the factory, the initial software. Subsequent releases, you could be able to update it, and we'll talk about it in the next slides. Demo application is also pre-installed, so you could use it for demonstration or testing purposes, like even for any preliminary test that you want to drive. You could always use this application before your line of business application integration is complete. Software is persistent. This is one of the critical requirements that we had. We want to make sure when you're installing it, especially for the certified solution, you want to make sure the software is persistent across factory and enterprise reset. When you do a factory reset or enterprise reset, whatever the last version of the software you installed, the dimensioning software, will persist across factory and enterprise reset. This is to make any errors at the field of wrongfully updating the wrong software, which leads into like place in trade challenges for the certified solution. We'll talk more about that in the coming slides. Software is updatable. You can update the software, dimensioning software, independent of the OS image via StageNow and EMM, and there are more procedures of that will come in the following slides. We do also support all the regulatory requirements for the certified solution, things like event log. The certified inspector wants to come and inspect the event logs. we do support those capabilities. We do also the information screen, which allows the inspector to inspect the event count and the software versions and all the parameters of the software. We also follow the rounding rules, as I spoke earlier in the previous slide. Software sealing is another critical requirement to make sure the software is protected against any seal break, reverse engineering or being tampered. API development, we do offer, like I said, APIs are offered for development integration of the line of business application. We also have the diagnostic capability for image dumping and log capture. If you are engaged with us for any debugging purposes, we'll always support this capability for you. Next slide. High-level software architecture. Want to quickly highlight this so that you understand what are the components of this solution, right? Like I said earlier, there's an MD client, which is on the top right corner, which is the demo application, which is going to be pre-installed coming out of the factory. When you get this units or the hardware, you would have this demo application pre-installed. This is mainly for demonstration and testing purpose, as I described before. And any updates, any software updates you would also get some updates for this demo application as a software bundle. The middle component you see is the dimensioning framework, which is the core of the solution. And you see a lock that's been put in there to represent that we are following the software sealing requirements from regulatory. Again, software sealing is to avoid any tampering of measurements or the software or software components. Again, the dimensioning framework is pre-installed coming out of the factory. It is a foreground service, just that you be aware of that. It's a service that's running on the running always. It is built on the concept of Android foreground service. Okay, you will see a notification on the device that it says the dimensioning is running. Okay, the framework could handle all the incoming APIs, which is we are building our APIs built on the intent architecture. If any APIs you would be calling from MD client or the line of business application that you would be building would all come to dimensioning framework, which does the rest of the core functionality. Again, the framework is signed by special zebra key to protect against any tampering and to meet the software sealing requirements. And then you also see a hardware that we see, the depth camera. Depth camera is also published as a regular camera, just like another Android regular camera, but it would give you all the depth information. We are also using the Android camera APIs to access it and get frames and stuff like that. Next slide. Software versioning scheme. Like I said earlier, this is critical, and why we did this, I would kind of talk to it. I'd take an example on the bottom, right? Sample version format. You would see there's a non-certified software bundle and then a certified software bundle, right? Even on the certified software bundle, there are different SKUs, like I described earlier. So if you are from US region, you would get a CMP US, the software version. If you are in the Europe region, you would get a CMP EU, and then the software version, right? Yeah, if you're looking for a non-certified software bundle, you would get an MP non-certified software bundle. If let's say you get a wrong software, you try to upload or try to upgrade, the system will stop you from upgrading those software bundles. To go into the details of what does this scheme means, right? The first two or three characters describe whether the software is a certified or a non-certified. MP describes mobile parcel, which is for non-certified solution. CMP describes certified mobile parcel. So the solution is for certified solution. Then the next two characters describe the region, specific region that you would be using against. Is it EU, European region, or US or Canada or other regions? Then you have the four major numbers, like four versioning scheme: your major, minor, patch, and build. For the developers and the partners here, the first two are the critical piece. The major version describes that this software is metrological software. Again, to give you more insights into what that means is, let's say we release version 1.0.0 for the first certified release, right? And we have to go and update our dimensioning range, like let's say from 100 centimeters to say 120 centimeters, we want to update our capabilities. We'll have to go for a recertification to these regulatory agencies. In order to be able to track that, all of those methodological changes or the capability changes would be tracked through the major versions. If you see a version 1 to a version 2, you got to be careful before you update. You got to see if you really want to use this capability. If you want to update it, you'll have to put your devices into something called place and trade, meaning you'll have to pull in the local regulatory agencies for inspection before the device can be used for trade. And the second item here is the minor version. It's mainly for non-methodological changes. Some of the examples could be you have UI change, something related to UI that we fixed, or something related to language that we fixed, right? That's not impacting the measurement, is considered non-methodological. The software components that impact the measurements would be considered methodological, and if not, it's considered non-methodological. So again, going back, reiterating on this, is you have the 4 versioning scheme. If it's a major version for the certified solution, it means that it has gone through a new certification through the agencies. Before you want to consume that, you got to be careful if you really want that software or not. If it's a minor version, if you have a 1.0.0 and you're getting a 1.2 or 1.3 or 1.4, you're more than happy to go use that, right? There's no impact there. But if you're going up a larger version, this is only for the certified solution. If you're going up to a next major version, you got to verify if you really want to consume that, if it's going to add capabilities to you or not. Okay. Again, feel free to reach out to us if you need more information on this. We'll be more than happy to help. Next slide. Installation procedures. I'm going to quickly run through this. There are 2 approaches here, and all of this information is available in the guide that we will be posting. It's pending posting in zebra.com. You'll have access to this, all the installation guide for English and other languages too. Right. There are 2 approaches that we recommend. We recommend Stage Now and EMM approach. And within Stage Now, you can use a couple of features there within the Stage Now feature set, using the OS update feature or an expert mode. I'm not going to go into the details of the EMM. Again, like I said, go look at these documents once it's published in the zebra.com. Okay. Go ahead, Ted. Next. Software installation procedure. Again, like I said, the Stage Now approach. I hope you guys have experience using this. If not, this is a pretty comprehensive documentation we have here. Recommendation again is make sure you have a Stage Now version 5.5.0, like 10.10 above or later, right? Make sure you have a Stage Now app in your target device, and before you do this, make sure you have a TC53 or 58 premium device. How do you check it? Make sure you're on the back of the device, you have you can either look at the part numbers, or you can look at something like this if you have a camera on the time of flight camera on the back, right? And in this particular approach, you got to be on the same Wi-Fi network. This approach, the OS update approach, requires you to be on the same Wi-Fi network, where your computer and the target device is on the same Wi-Fi network, so that it can transfer the zip bundle that we talked about in the software versioning scheme over the Wi-Fi network. Okay. Again, the steps are: you open the Stage Now, create a new profile, select the latest MX version in the drop-down list. Next slide. Ted. And then you select OS update, perform OS update feature. Put in your profile name, the profile name that you would like to, and you would select the do you want to like provision the network for staging or not, and continue. Next slide. Select OS update, full OS update method, and then make sure the Wi-Fi sleep option is set to yes. Right. Keep. Next slide. So here's the critical thing. So just make sure the software bundle is where do you want to copy the software bundle? Like it automatically copies this. It pulls it from your PC wherever you're recommending, okay, into a specific location in the device. Like in the point number 15, if you see, it's picking up the location from the computer, okay, and it's copying into a location on the point number 14. You see, it's copying into the SD card, right? In this particular example, we are demonstrating for the CMP EU version. The same is applicable. Don't copy the same file name. If you're using a non-certified, the file name should be MP non-certified zip file. Okay, next slide. Once you have all of those configurations set and you have your profile complete, you'll see the barcodes as you see in the point number 19. Okay, with the Stage Now client, you should be able to like choose PDF 417 and then scan the barcode of the from the Stage Now application on the mobile computer. As soon as you scan the barcode, it pulls the file into the device, copies it into a secure location, and performs the device reboot. So the device restarts and comes back to the home screen. It takes at least 3 minutes of update. So the recommendation is, again, we'll have some recommendations there. The recommendation is not to use the MD client or the demo application or your line of business application until the update is complete. You will see the notification on the top of the screen. The dimensioning update is in progress. Dimensioning update is complete, kind of scenarios. Once that is complete, then you should be able to use the application. Next slide. So this is the second option where you could use through expert mode, much easier. But this would be more localized, meaning that if you have the zip bundle copied into the SD card of the device, then this approach is much easier. If you have another approach of EMM pushing the zip file into your device and then use this approach to scan it off, you don't need to be on the same Wi-Fi network for this particular thing. Next slide. So again, the process is quite simple. Create your new profile, make sure you select the expert mode, ensure that you're using the Power Manager config. Then the one critical thing I just want to make sure highlight here is the point number 9. Use the OS upgrade. Upgrade only supported on Android Oreo and above. If you're using other options, there might be some issues that we haven't tested that. Again, before you do this, either you have the zip file in the device, the target, the mobile computer, or you're copying it manually to the SD card location that you want to copy to, right? Once you copied it and you go through the steps 11 to 14, you could scan of the barcode again, and you should be able to. The process is the same. So the device reboots and then comes back to the home screen. Takes at least 3 minutes to update and install before you could use. Okay, next slide. I think it's the API, so I would hand off to Ted. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Raghav. So as Raghav mentioned, my name is Ted Trask, Principal Software Engineer here at Zebra. So this is our first opportunity to share our dimensioning solution, our parcel dimensioning solution with you, and I'm going to work you through the API and a little bit about how to use it. We'll walk through some code. But we'll start here. Here's our API overview. There are only 5 methods, 5 APIs: enable, disable, get dimension parameter, set dimension parameter, and the key one, get dimension. So if we look in the bottom left, you see a simplified version of the state machine. There's a disabled state. You call the enable API, at which point it will be in an enabled state where you can get and set parameters. Once you call get dimension, it's in the dimensioning state, and it will return when the dimensioning session is complete. Of course, you can call disable dimension at any time. So on the right, then, we have a sequence diagram of how you might call these APIs. So we have our line of business application is running, and the dimensioning framework is running as well. Raghav mentioned it's a foreground service. It's running all the time. You would call the enable dimension API, and then you see here you get a pending intent response. So this is an intent API. You communicate by sending an intent to the dimensioning framework, and its response comes back through an pending intent that you pass to the framework, and we'll get into that. Then we see 3 calls: a get dimension parameter, a set dimension parameter, and another get dimension parameter. This is just an example. Don't feel that you have to do it that way. But as Raghav mentioned, we have different regions that are supported. Some of those regions will support multiple units. You can dimension in centimeters or inches if you're in the US or Canada, or you have a non-certified device. So you could call get dimension parameter to determine what units are supported. You would then set the dimension unit with the set dimension parameter. And interestingly, you call get dimension parameter again to get a ready state. That is what you should display in your application. We'll get into that later. Then here's where the rubber hits the road. The get dimension API is what's going to kick off the dimensioning session. As you see here, the dimensioning framework is then going to create the user interface. So a user interface is going to pop up above your line of business application, a full screen overlay. It will handle the entire dimensioning session. This is, necessary as a certified solution. The dimensioning framework is in complete control of the screen. Nobody can change what's going on. When the dimensioning session is complete, you'll then get your pending intent response from the dimensioning framework. And of course, there's a disable dimensioning API at the bottom. So please note this link here, this API guide is live. So most of what I'm going to go through here in the API is covered in that document if you need more details. But first, API security. So this is a Zebra requirement. You'll especially see it in new APIs that are coming out, that we're going to have access control for all of our APIs handled by the MX Access Manager. And there's a link there to TechDocs to give a little bit of description of what that is. So what that means is that only trusted applications can communicate through the mobile parcel API. And it is up to the stager or the developer to determine what applications are trusted. To do that, so all application packages are placed on an allow list inside the Access Manager. The line of business application is then required to generate an API token by calling into the Access Manager, and then that API token is passed into every single API along with the package name of the application. And then that way the dimensioning framework can authenticate that yes, this application is on the allow list, it is trusted, and it will respond. If this process isn't followed, all you'll receive is access denied. So this is an important step that needs to be done once. I'll clarify. So as you're doing development, you determine that an application is trusted based upon its package name and its signing certificate. So as you're doing debug development on your device, on your line of business application, it's likely that each developer is going to have that app signed by a different key. So that means each developer will need to go through this process for each device that he is going to be using. Once you're in production, well, hopefully they'll all be signed by the same release key, and the same process will work for every single device that this application is going to run on. Let's see a little bit more detail. Oh, first there's a note at the bottom that this is not the first time we had this access control. It's also implemented for the Data Wedge API, but on Data Wedge API, it is optional. So if you want more information, you can look there. I'll tell you that the process that Data Wedge uses in that document is much more complicated. We have a much simpler method that we'll share with you from our sample code. So the first thing, in order to add your application to the allow list, is we need the application certificate. Here's a process of how we would do that. This certificate will be needed in order to create a Stage Now profile to add your application to the allow list. So first, you would download the SIG Tools tool from Zebra's App Signature Tools. Here's a link to Tech Docs where that can be found. And then the steps that you'll follow, here's a command line that you would use. Obviously, you need Java installed on your computer. You'll be calling into SIG Tools the Get Cert API. The in form tells it that your input is an APK file. The out form, you're getting a DER certificate. And then the in parameter, you're giving it the file name of your APK that you have now developed. And then the out file is going to be a resulting certificate file. So you run this, you grab that certificate file, and you use it in the next step, which is, once again, Stage Now. So Raghav went through the Stage Now process of doing the update of the dimensioning, mobile parcel dimensioning software. This time it's similar to do the allow listing. So we download, we install Stage Now. You click on Create New Profile here in the upper left. You can verify the version of MX, that it's 11.1 or higher, and then we're going to be using the expert mode. You create a profile name, whatever name you choose, and previously we'd used the Power Manager or OS Update. Now, for this, we're using the Access Manager. You click on this Access Manager or the plus, it'll be added to the list here on the right, and then you click the Add button to continue. Here's the important part, the details. So what we want to do is we want to allow a caller to call a service, right? We're adding our application onto the allow list. So this is the action you want to choose, allow caller to call service. And then to identify your application, or to identify the service that you're going to be calling, you need this string, delegation-zebra-com.zebra.mobile dimensioning enable with a capital E. You can copy paste this out of the sample code. Then you identify the package, the application that you're giving permission, allowing to access the service. So you need the package name, com.company name.application, followed by the signature. So you would click on these three dots and allow you to browse your file system to find that certificate file. You then complete complete profile, and you're in the same state as before. Two methods of installing this profile on your device. You can scan the PDF barcode with Stage Now, or you can use an EMM to get that installed and install that using MX. We're not going to go into the details of that. You can find that elsewhere. So at this point, your device has in its allow list the information that allows your application to talk to the dimensioning framework service. But now we have to use that. So now we have to generate the token inside your line of business application that will be passed to the API. So you have to dynamically generate that API token. It's not something you do in advance. The token is going to be passed into every API request. And just to note, I noted elsewhere as well, but that API token is valid for 24 hours. So it has to be dynamic that you'll be generating this token. There's a link here. It's rather long, but here at the beginning, GitHub Zebra Devs mobile dimensioning samples is the sample code. We'll go more into that. But there's a broadcast protection library found there that we're going to show you how to use to generate the token. First thing, you'll include that AAR file in your libs folder. Inside your build.gradle file, you'll add it as a dependency. Here we choose to include all of the AAR files in that libs folder. And then here's the actual code. So that library exposes a class called Broadcast Authenticator. Here you see that is instantiated. In the onCreate, this is our sample code, so you can choose to do this elsewhere, but in the onCreate of our sample application, we initialize that Broadcast Authenticator. You'll pass in your application context and a callback. On-init callback is defined in that library. One method, oninitialize, to tell you that the Broadcast Authenticator is initialized. You can then generate your token. Note that this initialization should be very quick most of the time. There are some delays that come in, especially after a reboot. It might be about 30 seconds, or especially after a factory reset. It can take a few minutes for MX to be fully initialized. Just something to keep in mind. How do you generate the token? There's your second API, your second method, get token. And you pass in one parameter, which is that same string that we used before in generating the stage now profile. The results, one of two things: you'll either get a token, which is a string, and that string is a string of characters. We don't need to go into that. So if you get a string, then you have generated a token. You can then go ahead and start calling your APIs by sending those intents. And this code here, it just makes note of the token expiration, that token will expire 24 hours after now. You can choose to do that how you wish, but this is one thing. We keep track of the instant in time that that token will expire, and we can use that later. So now that you have the allow listing, you have your token. One more thing that needs to be done in preparation, and which is to add to the queries tag in your Android manifest. This is, you're adding the package. The package name of our mobile parcel dimensioning solution is com.zebra.dimensioning. So you add that here to allow the communication to occur. You might want to keep note of that string as well. That's the package name, which you'll need if you want to do explicit intents. Now the actual API. As mentioned, this is an intent-based API, so parameters are passed by passing extras on the intent, and there are some common extras for all of our API, for all the methods in this API. First, we have the API token and the package name. As we mentioned, this is for authentication. Those are simply strings. We'll show an example of doing that. And then a callback response. So you're passing a pending intent into the API. Now, this is the object that receives the response coming back from the framework. Two common extras in the response intent are result code and result message. Result code is an integer telling you what happened: success, failure, error, or canceled in the case of get dimension. And a result message, which is a string. So this is a human readable description, and it is localized based upon the language of the device, that your Android's language. So just a warning, not a good idea to do a string comparison on that, because it will change based upon your language. Here are some examples of what those results would look like. We're not going to go through the details here. Success is obvious. Failure is generally going to mean that something went wrong. Oh, my presentation went right. Okay. Something went wrong in the system. It could be that the framework is already in use, failed to open the camera, something like that. whereas error generally means that something is wrong in your application. You don't have your token, you pass the wrong parameter, you're in a wrong state. And then canceled, two reasons to be canceled: either the user canceled the session manually, or they left it for more than 30 seconds and it will cancel due to inactivity. So our first API, enable dimension. What this enable dimension API does is it starts the dimensioning service if it is not already running. It enables, configures the time of flight camera. So it's important to note that this will take some time. It might take a few seconds to enable the camera. And once enable is called, then the dimensioning framework holds that camera. And that means nobody else can use it, no other applications. So you want to balance time versus resources when calling enable. You don't want to wait until the user hits the button to do the dimension, because that will take some time to actually initialize the time flight camera. You also don't want to just grab the camera always, because it will take a little power and it will prevent any other applications from using that. So generally, if you go to a screen where you might do a dimension, you would call enable. If you leave that screen, you'd call disable. This parameter, here's the action that you would use in your intent. com.zebra.dimensioning.enable dimension. It takes one parameter in addition to the standard parameters, which is the key is module, and you must pass in this string, parcel, lowercase, to tell what type of dimensioning you're doing. Disable dimension is simple. It's going to release all of your resources. It takes no extra parameters, no extra results. It's simply disable dimension. Get dimension parameter. So we'll keep in mind that you must be in the enabled state in order to call get dimension parameter, and we'll get straight into the response. Here are the parameters that are available. We have a ready length, a ready width, and a ready height. This is our first note of the type big decimal. If you'll notice, Raghav had mentioned that we have rounding involved. So it's important to keep in mind the precision of our measurement and how many digits are valid. It will either be a whole number or a tenth, perhaps a tenth of an inch. The big decimal keeps track of that. So that's why we chose that type. So you will have either, there's a difference between a 12 and a 12.0, and big decimal tracks that. But what is the ready length, ready width, ready height? Well, if you're in a region and you are using a unit of measurement that supports a tenth, regulatory requirements, if you're going to display a ready state with a 0 value, like you would see on a scale, you'd see the 0, you actually have to match the number of the precision that you get from the measurement device. So you would need to either display a 0 or a 0.0, depending upon the state. So that's what this is going to tell you. And that's really up to the application to display. So you would call this to determine what, if you're going to display a 0 value in your application, whether it should be a 0 or 0.0. Your dimension unit, this is the unit you've selected, either inch or centimeter. You've got 3 different versions. The one that would, the framework version, the service version are really internal data, but the package version, this is the bundle. This should match what you installed using the procedure Raghav went through. Regulatory approval for your certified solution, it will actually tell you the certificate node, the certificate value coming from your regulatory body. Supported units, this is a string array. So it will tell you whether you support inch and centimeter or just centimeter, depending upon the region that you're in. And report image is a Boolean. You can use this to enable or disable having an image, the proof of dimension image come back as part of the dimension data. Here's an example on the right. So you can see it shows the parcel with an overlaid line and numbers of the dimensions, and the dimensions here at the bottom. This was a request from our beta testers to say that they wanted to be able to show this to a customer to show that they accurately measured the dimensions. So that is enabled that way. Then we have our set dimension parameter API. We have two parameters. The dimensioning unit, you're going to select either inch or centimeter. The default of this depends upon the region that you're in. So you'll see that as you play with the device. And then true or false to turn on and off the report image. So for the set dimension parameter API, these are extras that are added to the intent. You can add any, you can set 0 parameters, you can set just the unit, just the report image, or both, and that's fine. Keep in mind that when you change this dimensioning unit, your ready value that we discussed will change, which is why we did that extra get parameter afterward. Get dimension. The get dimension, as we mentioned, this is where the rubber hits the road. This is going to cause the UI to display. This is actually a full screen overlay dialog that will display on top of your line of business application. That means the user cannot interact with your application. We actually ensure that you should not receive any lifecycle API calls while the session is running. Even if the orientation of the device changes, you should not be getting on stop, on start. The UI of the framework should completely be in complete control of the device. On successful dimension or cancellation, you'll receive that pending intent back to your application. One parameter, parcel ID. This is for you to keep track, perhaps, of you scanned a barcode for the parcel, you want to associate it together. Whatever you pass in here will be returned as part of the data. And if you enable logging, as Raghav had discussed, that will be logged as well. Here's our response. We once again have a big decimal type for the length, width, and height dimension of the parcel. Then you have a string with the status for the length, width, and height. This is important to note. If the user cancels a session, you'll receive a cancel. But if the session completes and there is no dimension, like you can see here in the upper right, a screenshot where the screen is red, it shows no dim, that means we were unable to dimension. So you might get a response back where the status for all three of these is no dim. Obviously, you don't want to use that data. Otherwise, below range, in range, and above range, we can report to you data that is below range, above range. Here's your screenshot in the bottom right. It shows that the height here is 8.8 centimeters, which is below the range of 10. We'll still report that to you, but the status will tell you that it's below range. So that means that that measurement, it may be accurate, but it's not certified to be accurate. So be careful in how you use it. So if you require certified measurements, only use if all three are in range. Finally, our dimensioning unit. This is the unit that the dimensions are coming in either inch or centimeter. You'll receive an instant with a timestamp. The bitmap for the image will be reported if report image is turned on. And here's your parcel ID, the string that you passed in when you started the dimensioning session. Sample code walkthrough. I'm going to have to go through this very quickly. We're already 50 minutes in. But here's where you want to find our sample applications. You'll find that there are two, one for Java, one for Xamarin. And you can find the details on GitHub. Here's our code for send intent API. We called this earlier. So we're passing in an action and a bundle of extras. First, we check our token, make sure that the token is valid, not an empty string. You create an intent, just a new intent. The action is the API method that you're calling. You set that. Here's your package. This is an explicit intent going to com.zebra.dimensioning. And this is necessary when we get down here. And then you can add your required extras. First is the application package, which is simply a call to get package name. Our token string. And down here is an optional to add your extras. We'll get into that later. And then here you're creating a pending intent for your response. Request code, this is standard stuff. It's up to your line of business application to uniquely identify the intent. And you're putting an extra into that pending intent, into our intent to pass that pending intent as the callback response. Interesting note, we have an if statement here that if you're calling enable dimension, use start foreground service to send the intent. Now, the dimensioning framework should be running as a foreground service all the time. On the off chance that something goes wrong, that foreground service is killed by the system, this is a good idea, and this will restart that service. And this is actually why you're required, in this case, to make it an explicit intent. Otherwise, we just do a send broadcast of the intent. How do we use that? Here's an example for set dimension parameter. So we create a bundle for our extras. We put in the string with the unit, the Boolean with the report image, and we call send intent API. Here's the string for that set dimension parameter API and the bundle of extras. And this will set the dimension unit and the report image flag. Alternately, you can overload. We did this in our sample code. A method that will take the action and two strings, the extra key and the extra value. So internally to this, we create the bundle, add that extra, and call the same API. So here's an example of enable dimensioning, where we call the enable dimension API, and we set the module extra to that required string parcel. Responses. So how does the application get the response? Well, the response is going to come to your onActivity result API, since you're passing that pending intent. There's code here. It checks the request code, checks the intent is not null. Here just shows how we pull the data out. The action name is going to be the API that was called. So you do get action on that intent that was passed in. The result code is a int extra, so it's an integer. The result code, get a string extra for the result message for the result. And then here, this is obviously not doing any processing, but we can do a switch on that action name for each of the 5 APIs to handle the response for each of those APIs. How do we do that? Well, here's an example of the response that you would have for the get dimension API. This simply shows how to pull the various data out of the intent. So for the big decimal variables, we're going to use a get serializable extra and then cast it to a big decimal. Strings are just get string extra. The timestamp is an instant. So once again, get serializable extra and cast it to an instant. For the image, the bitmap that is passed, if you turn on report image, you would call get parcelable extra and cast that to a bitmap. You can then choose to do whatever you'd like with it. And parcel ID is optional, so we're checking if the extras contains that key. It's just a string. So the processing would go here. The first thing that you would want to do is, of course, check the status, make sure it's not a no dim or the information out of range, and then you would process the data. And this, of course, this is if it was a success. Your options are 0 for success, 3 would be for canceled. You can handle that how you choose, and for failure or an error occurs. Here we just display a toast. Another example for your onActivity case statement for get dimension parameter. Once again, your big decimals are with get serializable extra. Two things that are different here. Here's for your supported units, it's get string array extra. For your Boolean, it's get Boolean extra. But here you're pulling out each of those parameters into variables that you can then process. So here's a note just to remind us about calling enable and disable. In our sample application, in the onStart API, we call the enable dimension. You'll probably not want to do that for your entire application, but just for the screens that are using, or the activities that are using dimensioning. And then on our onStop, we call disable. So that means when our application loses the screen, you switch applications, the dimensioning framework is closed and disabled. Also a note here, here's a check to see if the token has expired. So if the expiration time is before now, we just call that generate token API again, and you can generate tokens as many times as you want, and they'll be valid for 24 hours. So based upon enable, when you call enable, it grabs the time of flight camera and sits in the enabled state. If your application crashes at that point in time, since this is an intent API, the framework does not know that, and will continue to hold that time of flight camera forever, a potential problem. So here's what we recommend. We, in our sample app, we've created a separate application class, application dimensioning client, which sets the default uncaught exception handler. So if your application, I'm sure this will never happen to you, if your application does have an uncaught exception, we handle it here and send a disable dimension intent to disable that, to free up the resources. If you don't do this and your application crashes, the framework will hold onto that time of flight camera. No one else can use it. So how do you recover? First, if you launch your application again and it calls enable dimension, the framework detects it's the same application. It can gain control again and it can disable and free that resource. Otherwise, you would have to wait until a reboot or the framework to be force closed, which we do not recommend, but I'm just giving you the information. Similarly, on the off chance that the foreground service crashes, we'll pretend this never happens, but we'll put this in here just to be careful. The framework also has an uncaught exception handler, and what it does is it sends out an intent, a broadcast intent, com.0.dimensioning.application crash. So you can choose to listen for that broadcast intent. If you find it, then you can simply call enable again. It will restart the service and hopefully get you up and running. We're already an hour in. Our final slide. Some of this is just reminders we've already gone through. Application lifecycle, that you want to remember that you only want to enable dimensioning when you want dimensioning to be active. So when your activity that uses dimension is live, and disable it as we just discussed for resource purposes. Versus timing. You don't want to wait too long either. Asynchronous errors. So we may run into a situation, especially after right after a reboot, where the camera has, it might crash, throw an exception. So you should be ready to receive more than one response to your enable dimensioning API. So what that means, you send the enable dimension API, you get a response that says success. At some point later in time, you get a second callback, once again for enable dimensioning, this time saying failure. So just be prepared, that may happen on occasion. The response is simply to re-enable the framework, because that will indicate that something went wrong and we've disabled dimensioning because of the failure. So you can just re-enable in your application. Multi-window and split screen are not supported. Simply there's a bug in Android which prevents our UI from appearing. So you would call get dimension and nothing would happen. So hopefully this will be fixed by Google at some point, but for now we do not support the multi-window, or as our device calls it, split screen mode for dimension. Reminder, your token will expire after 24 hours. EMDK MX initialization delay. So after a factory reset, MX takes some time to get ready. It can take up to several minutes. And before that happens, you will not be able to generate a token. At that point, if it's a factory reset, you also won't be able to add your device to the allow list. But just keep that in mind. If there is a factory or enterprise, particularly factory reset, MX can take a few minutes to be ready. But then after a reboot, it can also take several seconds. So your application may try and acquire a token and it fails if you're launching it immediately after a reboot. You can simply retry after a timeout. MD update. So if our mobile parcel solution is updated, as Raghav had described before, as he mentioned, it can take 3 minutes after the device restarts. So you'll install your profile for the update. It will cause the device to restart. It then takes some time for the framework to get up and running, update itself, and then get relaunch itself. So keep that in mind. And then we mentioned camera startup latency. If you were to enable dimensioning and rapidly stop and cancel, get dimension, cancel, get dimension, cancel, we have seen camera failures in that case, which means you'll have to disable and re-enable dimension. So not a good idea to overload the system right after a suspend resume. Well, that was a lot of information. I'm sorry that we took so long. I think now we're ready for any questions.
No worries. Thank you very much, Ted and Raghav. A very great presentation. Thank you very much. As you will be aware, we're a couple of minutes over time, so unfortunately we won't have any time for questions. Any questions that we do have, though, we will take a note of and we'll get them over to Ted and Raghav or the appropriate member of the team, and we will get back to you through the various avenues that we have for those. If you have any questions that come to mind after the fact, I know that's always the case with me when I start playing with the APIs, then the questions start springing to mind. Please feel free to email us, developer@zebra.com, or as I mentioned at the start, navigate over to the developer portal forums and post your question there and someone from the team will get back to you. So once again, thank you very much to our presenters, Ted, Raghav. Thanks very much for your time today. It was a great presentation. And of course, thank you to all of our attendees as well. So we hope to see you next time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day or your evening or afternoon, and we'll speak to you all soon. Thank you very much.